today's session. I hope that I'm very much loud and clear. As we know that we all are having a difficult times, present COVID-19 pandemic. And in fact, there are a lot of uncertainty. It's surprising that constantly the number of cases is rising day by day. And in fact, as per WHO report of 25th May 21, in Southeast Asia alone, there are over more than 2 million new cases reported, and there are more than 32,000 new death cases reported. In fact, in last few days, there is a development that could have changed our strategy in coming days. And one of them is increasingly become a challenge for India. It's called as black fungus. In scientific terminology, we call it as a mucormycosis. It's a rare and deadly fungal infection. It has been reported in several states of India. In India, mostly it is reported among the COVID patient. For surprise, there are more than 11,000 cases reported at present. And in the state of Maharashtra, as per report of 5th June, there are more than 6,000 cases in a single state. And there are various states which are also having a higher number of cases, which includes Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh. In fact, considering the mucormycosis, the people who have survived the virus, but now they are facing a new battle. There are a lot of questions which has been raised, not just among the people, but also in the mind of medical fraternity. To unsolve this puzzle, Indian Medical Association Raipur branch, Indian Dental Association Raipur branch, Association of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgery of India, Chhattisgarh chapter, Indian Prosthodontic Society, Chhattisgarh state branch, and Chhattisgarh Association of Medical Microbiology have come together today to share their experience and knowledge among their fraternity in a form of panel discussion. I welcome all the panelists. To start with, Dr. Vikas Agrawal. He is a family physician. He is a president of Indian Medical Association Raipur. Dr. Anil Jain, a well-known ENT surgeon of our city. He is a president of Association of Otolaryngology of Raipur. He is also president of Hospital Board of Raipur. Dr. Ankur Srivastava, he is the additional professor, Department of Ophthalmology, AIIMS, Raipur. Dr. Sanjeev Kumar Srivastava, he is a consultant anesthetist and a fellow diploma in critical care. He is a consultant in VY Hospital, Raipur. Dr. Manish Raghani, he is a president of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgeon, additional professor, AIIMS Raipur. He is also Honorable General Secretary of Chhattisgarh AOMSI. We do have the respected Madam Dr. Sabha Javed. She is consultant microbiologist and infection control officer. She is consultant in Ramakrishna Care Hospital, Raipur. As an expert in the field of radiodiagnosis, we have Dr. Anand Bansal. Dr. Anand Bansal is a director of Sri Ram Imaging Center and Diagnostic Center. Myself, Dr. Neeraj Kumar Chandrakar, I'll be the moderator for the session. And by profession, I'm a maxillofacial prosthodontist and implantologist. In fact, I'm a president of Indian Dental Association Raipur branch, editor of Indian Prosthodontic Society, and I'm associate professor in Government Dental College Raipur, consultant to Changing Faces India also. To start with this session, we do encounter many questions. We do encounter many queries regarding mucormycosis, what it is, how exactly it spreads, whether it is deadly, whether it is communicable. There are many uncertainties among the laymen, but in fact, among the medical fraternity, sometimes we do encounter that many of the medical fraternity, they feel a bit dilemma that who are the exact consultant at a particular stage. So this panel discussion is basically meant to open the session and to start the discussion, basically we need to understand about the mucormycosis. So when we know about the mucormycosis, specifically, we know that mucormycosis is not a new thing. Mucormycosis was there beforehand also. But why in COVID pandemic, we see there is an increased number of cases? May I request Dr. Vikas Agrawal that why we are seeing many cases of mucormycosis nowadays?
Hello, everybody. Actually, mucormycosis represents a group of life-threatening non-aspergillus fungal infections, which is caused by fungi of Mycotina subphylum. The commonest cause of mucormycosis is Rhizophus oryzae and Rhizophus dilemma, but in India, probably it's Actinomucor elegans. This will be confirmed by Dr. Sabha ma'am later on. In Southeast Asia, the maximum cases are being seen in India, probably due to some predisposing factors like humid atmosphere. Fungi is present in abundance in the soil, and there may be some genetic predisposition as well. Black fungus word is actually misnomer. This is due to black discoloration of the necrosed tissue. So this involves different different organ systems of the body. For etiopathogenesis, Dr. Anil Jain will discuss in detail. As we come to the classification, there are 5 types of mucormycosis. The commonest one is rhino-orbitocerebral disease. The second most common presentation is in form of pulmonary disease. Cutaneous disease is seen when usually wound is soiled with fungus. Gastrointestinal disease may present in form of fungating masses in stomach and visceral perforations, as being seen in Rajkot, where more than 100 cases of intestinal perforation have been seen in last 1 month, which may be probably due to mucormycosis. These all cases are seen in post-COVID patients. The last one is, which is most having 90% mortality, is disseminated and miscellaneous form of disease, which is seen after hematogenous spread of mucormycosis, where it may involve most commonly bones, mediastinum, trachea, kidneys, and peritoneum. So over to Dr. Neeraj. But in the today's panel discussion, we are going to discuss only mucormycosis, which is going to involve head and neck region. Later on in other panel discussion, we may involve other systems as well. Over to Dr. Neeraj.
Thank you very much, sir, for giving a brief overview about the mucormycosis. But it is also important to understand that what is the exactly etiopathogenesis regarding the about the mucormycosis. So can I request Dr. Anil Jain to give an overview about how exactly we can give a brief overview about the etiopathogenesis related to the mucormycosis. Dr. Anil Jain.
Thank you, Neeraj. Good morning, everyone. I think my voice is clear.
Loud and clear, sir.
Okay. The mucormycosis is caused by a group of fungi. The phylum of this fungi is Zygomycotica. The subphylum is Mucormycotina, and the order is Mucorales. The species of this order, Mucorales, especially which causes rhinocerebral mucormycosis, is Rhizopus and Mucor. But the most deadly one is the Cunningham or Absidia. This mucormycosis fungus is ubiquitous in the soil and air. It is more common in soil than the air. It is basically an opportunistic pathogen present everywhere. Everywhere means in the soil, in the air, even in the our noses and sinuses sometimes. But unless the immunity is breached, immune system of the person is breached, it is not going to cause the disease. Why this immunosuppression is occurring in this area of in this era of COVID? The immunosuppression is caused by the uncontrolled diabetes mellitus, the overuse of corticosteroid, hemopoietic malignancies, which causes immunosuppression, solid organ transplantation, neutropenia, iron overload, malnutrition, chemotherapy. This all causes immunosuppression, and which leads to this fungus grow inside the body. How this fungus spreads, the transmission. Basically, it is the sporangia spores, which is easily aerosolized. and can be spread by mostly by the inhalation. Apart from inhalation, it can be direct inoculation or ingestion, can give rise to spread of this disease. It is present even in fermented porridge and contaminated herbal remedies, and even the contaminated alcohol drinks. There are various types of uh, mucormycosis and various type of immunosuppressions which causes other types of mucormycosis. The most common which we are going to discuss today is the rhino-orbital cerebral mucormycosis. And the most important factor is the diabetes and the COVID. The other mucormycosis like pulmonary mucormycosis, it is more common in hematological malignancies, the gastrointestinal mucormycosis in malnutrition and neonates, the disseminated mucormycosis, the neutropenia is the main predisposing factor. And other is the cutaneous mucormycosis. In this, the patient is not necessarily immunocompromised, but it can be immunocompetent. It occurs when there is a trauma or burn.
Sir, there is one more question which is normally raised. Like, as we know that mucormycosis was there beforehand, but nowadays, how come there is like a big blast in the number of mucormycosis? And as it has been said that it is related to COVID. So can you just briefly
Yes,
tell us what are
I'm
the...
coming to that point. I'm
Yes.
coming to that point. Yes. Let me just give brief of the etiopathogenesis, then I will come to that point. The fungal spores are inhaled, then how it spreads inside the nose and sinuses. It is inhaled via the nose and then evades phagocytosis by the macrophages and neutrophils. Then after spores, it germinates into the stage of hyphae. Hyphae is the stage of fungus which is the most angioinvasive. Angioinvasion is the most is the pathogenesis which causes the necrosis and thrombosis. After the angioinvasion, there is increase in the growth of virulence of the fungus by taking the advantage of host immunocompromised state. It attaches itself to the endothelium of the vessels and causes damage to the endothelium. And by causing damage, there is thrombosis and tissue necrosis. And because of this, it disseminates hematogenously. The hallmark of this disease is the rapid and aggressive invasion of the blood vessels that results in thrombosis, tissue necrosis, and hematogenous dissemination of the fungus. Platelet also plays a very important role in host immunity. Once it adheres to the fungal spores and hyphae, it causes enhancement of the clot formation, and that leads to thromboembolic phenomena and then the ischemic necrosis. Now I am coming to that point you're asking, Neeraj. Now, why this is more common nowadays? Because of the COVID-19. The COVID-19 itself causes immunosuppression, the neutropenia, and there is a high ferritin level in the blood of the patient of the COVID. And COVID itself causes damage to the beta cells of the pancreas, which leads to hyperglycemia, which is one of the major factor giving immunosuppression. In COVID-19 treatment, basically, the treatment part is also responsible for the immunosuppression. High doses and early initiation of steroid therapy, uncontrolled diabetes mellitus or diabetic ketoacidosis, prolonged use of broad spectrum antibiotics, oxygen therapy if a tap water which is infected is used, and the use of tocilizumab. These are all factors which is causing high number of cases of mucormycosis, basically the rhinocerebral one, in this era of COVID.
Okay, so these are the different theories which has been given in related to the recent outspurt of mucormycosis. Sir, can you just briefly tell us that what are the basic like sign and symptoms? Can just an overview about the sign and symptoms, especially related to the ENT field, that how we are supposed to go ahead with the diagnosis and I'm to say the basic findings about sign and symptoms related to the mucormycosis and specifically about the rhinocerebral mucormycosis.
If we talk about the ENT related sign and symptoms related to ENT, the most common symptom related to a nose is a nasal obstruction, nasal stuffiness, crust formation. Sometimes we get epistaxis, present complaint of epistaxis. there is a heaviness or pain in the nose, headache, swelling around the eye. Patient complains of diminution of vision sometimes, numbness in the face, or epiphora. These are the various symptoms which can be presented uh, in the cases of mucormycosis. But one thing I would like to point out, the one word which is coined as mucorphobia. Because of the phobia of the mucor, the many patients are coming with the lazy symptoms. You can get very lazy symptom, some pricking sensation in the eye, some pricking sensation in the face and everything. But there is no history of COVID or anything. So there must be some protocol we should use to how much we should investigate these patients. We should not even over investigate or under investigate. So this should be kept in the mind. Regarding the symptoms related to the oral cavity, I think our colleague will tell us better about that.
Yes, we do have Dr. Manish Ragani with us, who's an oral and maxillofacial surgeon. Dr. Manish, can you please give a brief overview that what are the signs and symptoms which is specifically related to the oral findings? But as we see that most of the patients who approach to us in the initial stage or maybe like later stage, knowingly or unknowingly, either to the dentist or to the ENT surgeon. So Dr. Manish, what are the oral findings?
Good morning, everyone. Am I audible, Neeraj?
Yes, doctor, please.
Yes. So, as Dr. Anil Jain sir has rightly described and elaborately described that it starts with the sinuses, inhalation of fungal spores. So, the mucormycosis can spread in downward direction towards oral cavity and teeth. So, sometimes we find very minimal ENT symptoms, but we find patients with oral findings. Oral findings especially includes early symptoms and late symptoms. Early symptoms includes loosening of the teeth, tenderness, then pain in the teeth, and especially to my young colleagues, I would like to advise that when they examine these patients with oral pustules, the periapical abscess, it mimics that the tooth infection. But you have to go for a detailed, thorough history of the patient and see whether these tooth actually are affected by mucormycosis. The tooth becomes loose, they are tender to percussion, there are pain in the tooth, and in that case, we have received some patients in which the dentist does root canal treatment and there is no relief of symptoms, still mobility is there, then they do extraction and then send to us. So what I advise to them is, whenever you suspect a case of mucormycosis, take proper history, and then if you find sudden loosening of the tooth without any cause, take a small piece of biopsy from the bone. If you just raise the flap and take biopsy and send that. Other oral findings are which may occur later, like there will be sloughing in the palate region, which may be black discoloration or yellow discoloration, and there may be sloughing in the buccal side of the oral cavity, and later on there will be loosening and dropping, falling of the teeth also. And other findings which are important are the swelling in the facial region, especially paresthesia in the infraorbital nerve distribution region, and redness and edema in the facial region also.
Okay.
Apart from that, there are other orbitals and other manifestations which may be dealt by other colleagues.
Yeah. So in fact, we do have our ophthalmic surgeon with us, Dr. Ankur. Dr. Ankur, can you just elaborate a brief about ophthalmic findings of mucormycosis?
Yeah, good morning, Dr. Neeraj. Am I audible?
Yeah, absolutely, please.
So as rightly said by Dr. Anil Jain sir, most of the cases which are presenting to us, they are initially presenting with ENT and mostly with nasal manifestations. And most of the cases presenting to us are in the later stages. They present with proptosis, or in the severe stages. We'll definitely show some pictures if we can, Dr. Neeraj. So most of the initial stages, the patient presents with some discoloration, the edema around the eyelid or in the periorbital area, and there is a specific discoloration, and that is why it has been broadly called as black fungus nowadays, because it produces a lot of necrotic tissue and blackish discoloration in the facial planes. So as you can see in these photographs here, these are some clinical photographs of the patients, and initially the patient presents to us with pain in the eye, or pain over the sinuses, or pain in the periorbital region, or associated with dental pain, or a paresthesia in the infraorbital area. As, some cases present to us with proptosis, which is usually the non-axial type of proptosis, and it's just a quiescent eye. So there is nothing, just the patient is presenting to us with a symptom of proptosis. There is no conjunctival congestion, there is no chemosis. This is one spectrum of the disease. On the other end, the patient present to us with blackish discoloration of the lids, with frank mucopurulent discharge, along with edema in the periorbital area. So these are the common signs and symptoms. There's a lot spectrum of the disease, right from a quiet eye to the eye which is having a lot of pus and mucopurulent discharge. The important point is that we have to correlate everything with the clinical history of the patient.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. Dr. Sanjeev, are you Dr. Sanjeev Srivastava? Uh, can you just elaborate any other findings other than like what Dr. Manish or Dr. Anil or Dr. Ankur has told over here?
Okay, good morning to all of you. Apart from orbital, nasal, other symptoms, other manifestation also present, like in cutaneous mucormycosis symptoms may looks like blister or ulcer, and infected area then turn into black color, black discoloration, and other symptoms include pain, warmth, excessive redness, swelling around the lesion. If pulmonary involvement occur, the symptoms may present cough, chest pain, breathing difficulties, and when GI symptoms involvement occur, symptoms may occur abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, hematemesis, and lesion may lead to perforation, and peritonitis may also present. If renal involvement occur, there may be fever and flank pain may be present, and mostly severe symptoms when CNS involvement occur, the lesion may be the symptoms may be present as lethargy and neurological deficit, which may lead to coma.
Okay, thank you very much. Other than findings, once as we know that once we have seen some sign and symptoms, the another important thing is like how can we go ahead with the confirmatory procedure? Obviously, we need some kind of diagnostic tool. And as we know that most of the time, especially in the current scenario, the patient are approaching to us or to ENT surgeon with some kind of complaint. And Dr. Anil Jain, coming back again to Dr. Anil Jain, can you just elaborate any important diagnostic tool? As we have heard a lot about endoscopy is working well, or like endoscopy help us to primarily determine if whether there is any infection or not. So I request Dr. Anil Jain to kindly give an overview about that how endoscopy can be an important diagnostic tool.
Yes, Dr. Neeraj, the nasal endoscopy is a very important diagnostic tool. Whenever the patient comes with the symptoms suggestive of mucormycosis, we should go for the nasal endoscopy. There are various specific findings which we see in nasal endoscopy. As you can see in the screen, there is a scarring in the crust formation in the septum. There is the nasal septum on the left side. There is a erosion of the bone and there is a crust formation over here. Can I have the next one?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, other than the crust formation, we can get can see the there's the necrous tissue which is in the right middle meatus. You can see this creamish necrosed tissue which we can see with the help of nasal endoscope, and we can take the biopsy from here and confirm the diagnosis. Another finding which may see is the blackish discoloration of mucosa of turbinates. Turbinates is the structure which is most commonly involved in this disease. This is the septum from where we are taking the biopsy and confirm the disease. Another thing which we can rule out by the nasal endoscopy is that when the patient present with the various symptoms suggestive of mucor, but these symptoms may be because of the simple bacterial sinusitis also. So it is very important to differentiate between the bacterial sinusitis and whether it is invasive fungal sinusitis. As you can see in one of the nasal endoscopic finding, this mucopus is coming in the from the middle meatus. So this is suggestive of bacterial sinusitis. It is not the invasive fungal sinusitis. On the other hand, you can see there is a blackish discoloration of the turbinate. This is caused by invasive fungal sinusitis. So these are the various findings we should keep in mind while doing a nasal endoscopy, so that we can differentiate between the simple bacterial sinusitis and the invasive fungal sinusitis. And the rest of the diagnosis depends upon the imaging findings, which Dr. Anand will tell us.
Thank you very much, sir. That's really nice. You have given a very brief overview about the importance of endoscopy. But we also know that one of the very important tool is about the radiographic finding. May I request Dr. Anand, who is our radio diagnosis expert. Sir, I want to know, like, investigation of choice to diagnose the mucormycosis. What is the most probable investigation of choice?
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. So, sir, there are total 3 investigations for the mucormycosis. One is X-ray plane, then CT scan, and the MRI. The investigation of choice for the mucormycosis is the contrast enhanced MRI. But sir, CT and MRI both are equally useful. The CT is being done because it is fast, easily available, easy to understand, and the bony anatomy is better available in the CT scan. But the investigation of choice for the mucormycosis is gadolinium enhanced MRI. So because MRI also picks up the early disease and CT scan may not pick up the early disease. So we have to identify the early, so may we not end up in the surgery and we can manage the medically. So what are the findings in the MRI? We see the typical finding in MRI. We see the black turbinate sign. So the black turbinate sign is because of angioinvasive nature of the fungus. It causes the necrosis of the turbinates. So the turbinates appears black in the T2 weighted images and the contrast images, because these are necrosed and it will not enhance in the MRI. And in the CT scan and MRI, they separate one more important significant finding is the periantral fat involvement, the loss of normal periantral fat. So I will show you the picture later on. In the CT scan or MRI, there is normal fat pad around the maxillary sinus. So it is lost in the mucormycosis because of permeative involvement of the disease. Can you show the picture, sir? So the next one. Sir, this one. So this is the typical involvement of the mucormycosis. As you can see on the left side, there is a normal black fat around the maxillary sinus. But on the right side, because of involvement of the mucormycosis, there is loss of normal fat pad. And so there is other sequences. We can see the MRI are the T1 weighted, T2 weighted, fat suppressed, and the diffusion weighted. So 1 minute, sir. Can you show the next picture, sir? Sir. No, sir, the previous one. Sir. Sir. Next one, next one. In these images, sir, we can see the involvement of the inferior orbital foramina because of the extension of disease from the orbit into the maxillary sinus. So the next sign is this hyperdense mucosa. So the hyperdense mucosa is seen in the mucormycosis is because of the high iron pigment of the mucormycosis. It also helps us to differentiate from the allergic and the other chronic sinusitis. In the other chronic sinusitis, sir, we can see the dense bones because of the sclerosis. But in the mucormycosis, we see the permeative erosion of the bone. So the important structures we should comment on the CT scan or MRI are the cribriform plate of the brain to know the extent in the disease in the brain. Now the lamina papyracea or the medial orbital wall, and the pterygopalatine fossa, and this cavernous sinus. And can you show this images of the pterygopalatine fossa? So this pterygopalatine fossa is very important to evaluate because from here disease can go laterally into the infratemporal fossa medially into the nasal cavity, and superiorly into the infratemporal fossa to the superiorly into the middle cranial fossa through the foramen rotundum and the orbital. So pterygopalatine fossa or PP fossa is very important to evaluate in case of mucormycosis because this is the site of recurrence. So next picture, please. Yes. And the sir, important structure to evaluate in the mucormycosis is the sir, nasolacrimal duct. As we can see in this picture, in the CT scan axial images, the left nasolacrimal duct is black one, the air-free and normal. But on the right side, the nasolacrimal duct is filled with the soft tissue. It means that the nasolacrimal duct is involved and the disease will further may progress into the orbit. And on the right aspect of the images are this MRI coronal sections of the orbit, and it's showing the hyperintensity in the superior rectus and medial rectus muscle, means the disease extension into the orbit from the middle ethmoidal sinuses. And so the next image, sir.
Previous one.
Sir. So this is typical picture of the black turbinate sign. You can see the whole area of middle turbinates, superior ethmoid sinuses, and middle wall of orbits are involved, and the entire thing is the black. This is because of the necrosis of the tissue, and the tissue is further progressing into the orbit via the erosion of the lamina papyracea. So this is locally aggressive mucormycosis, and we can also see the right images. The cribriform plate is also involved, and the disease is extending into the brain.
Okay. So, sir, you have given a very good overview. Like, but normally we do encounter a condition where like we do find difficulty to differentiate between a sinus which is infected with mucor or with like other sinusitis. So, can you just give a brief overview, like how to differentiate between a sinusitis and a sinus
Yes,
which is infected with mucor?
Yes, sir. So mainly in sinusitis, the mucor is the permeative destructive disease. So it permeates the bone and extends the boundary around the maxillary sinus. So the loss of perienteral fat is very specific for the mucormycosis, but in the other allergic or chronic sinusitis, the fat around the antrum is spared and is not involved. And in the chronic sinusitis, there will be hyperdensity or calcification because of chronic nature of disease, and the bones of the sinuses will be sclerosed and the thickened. But where in the mucormycosis, the bone will be permeated and the hypodense, or it will be eroded.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So because mucormycosis doesn't respect the boundaries, so it aggressively involves all structures.
And how about the radiological feature of like sinonasal mucormycosis? Like, can you just pinpointly say some 2-3 important radiological feature related to sinonasal mucormycosis?
Mucormycosis.
Yeah.
So sinonasal mucormycosis mostly involves the turbinates, and it causes the involvement of the medial lamina papyracea cribriform plate if you are finding the necrosis and the entrapped air foci between the mucosal thickening. So it suggests the aggressive nature of disease and the mucormycosis. But if we are comparing with the sinonasal polyposis, the close mimic of mucormycosis, we will not get the air trapped in between the polyps. So
Okay.
it will be like mucus projection, but loss of aeration, and it will be smooth and non-necrotic tissue.
So as you have, as what I understood, or most probably our audience have understood this, like other than this radiological finding, this MRI, CT, do other radiological tools are important in determining the mucormycosis? Specifically, like initial level, we in field of dentistry we take OPG or AP or other view. So like, is it, how relevant are those things in case of early lesion or in case of later lesion?
Yes, sir. So the like orthopentomogram or X-ray PNS, these are not useful in the early disease, and the early disease can be easily missed by these investigations. And these investigations mostly tells about the advanced disease like palatal erosions, loosening of teeth, or turbinate erosion. So the plain radiograph are useful only in the advanced disease, and those are mostly picked up earlier by the endoscopy or symptoms, blackening of the eyes. So I don't think these are useful investigations for the mucormycosis as far as the aggressive nature of the disease is concerned.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Anand, for giving
Thank
an
you, sir.
overview. I have a question for Dr. Manish. Dr. Manish, as Dr. Anil Jain has already told about the biopsy, can you just give an important diagnostic tool like we do here, like culture is important or biopsy is important? Can you give an overview that how exactly we are supposed to take the biopsy sample or a culture sample? Question is to you for Dr. Manish.
Yes, Dr. Yes. Would you like to share some pictures which are given to you?
Yeah, sure.
So here I would like to say that culture, when we take from oral cavity, you can take culture from first draining sinuses, and you can take culture from first draining external sinuses. You can take some scrapings from skin for KOH mount. I think Dr. Sabha madam will agree with me. KOH mount reports will come within hours, within 1 or 2 hours. But many times we get these reports negative. So biopsy, I think biopsy should be done, means it is more confirmatory. What I advise to our young colleague is that you just raise the flap like which I shown in near previous picture.
This one.
Yes. In this picture, can you see? You can see that loosening of the teeth is present, and the bone which is above the canine and premolar, it is actually sequestered, and it is appearing in yellowish in color apart from the normal bone. So what we can do, we can take some pieces from this bone and send for biopsy. So that will be more confirmatory. So, and that I think madam will give in detail that should be sent in for KOH mind, it should be sent in saline, and for histopathology we should send in formalin.
Okay.
So here I would like to say that apart from taking swabs from nasal cavity, nasopharynx, first draining sinuses from oral cavity, send some piece of bone spicules from oral cavity and send for biopsy. That will be more confirmatory.
Okay, that's good.
Yes.
Again, now the next question is to Dr. Sabha. Madam, is it I'm audible to you?
Yeah, you are audible. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ma'am. As Dr. Manish has told, we can take a biopsy and a culture. My question is when we talk about the culture aspect, how confirmatory is this diagnosis of this microbiological culture for the mucormycosis?
Yeah, Neeraj, thank you very much for this question. But before going on to the culture, first I would like to emphasize on the microscopy, mainly on the KOH examination. This KOH examination, it is a very cheap, easily available thing. And as Dr. Manish said that if you send the biopsy tissue or the scraping or the pus directly to the microbiological lab, we can give you the presumptive diagnosis of the mucor by seeing the KOH within 2 to 3 hours. Because this is very easy, and this will aid in your early intervention in the patient. So to save the patient either by surgical intervention or by the medical intervention. So this KOH microscopy is very important, and it's very easy. Like you see in the first of the slide, in the KOH preparation, these mucor or the fungus which belongs to the Mucorales order, they looks like very different from the other fungus like the Aspergillus. Their septa are very broad, they are ribbon-like, irregular branching, or they are at the right angle branching. It's very clearly seen in the KOH, because the KOH has the property to dissolve all other things, but these fungi, the hyphae, they are resistant to the KOH. So they will be seen very clearly in the KOH, and we will give the report within 2 to 3 hours to the primary consultant or the surgeon or who are involved in the patient's treatment plan. The next thing is another thing which add into the diagnosis is the fluorescent microscopy. There are some fluorescent stains are available, like the CalcoFluor stain. They will also give the very good report, very rapid thing. Then another one which you asked me, the culture. The culture is very important. It is one of the cornerstone in the diagnosis of of the mucor. Like if you said a good sample, like as Dr. Manish said, the biopsy, it's very good. The sensitivity is very good. We also reported this mucor in the BAL samples, even in the swab, if it is taken in a good way, in a very with a good amount, or in timely it reach into the microbiological laboratory. So in the culture, we put the sample into the routine standard plates, SD agar, and the mucor fungus is very rapidly growing. As you know, they grow within 24 to 72 hours onto the SD agar plate. And initially there's a cotton woolly growth, like you see into the next slide. Please show the slide of the culture. Next one. Yeah, so initially there's a cotton woolly growth, and they are so rapid growers, they are known as a lid lifters. They lift the lid of the Petri plate, and later on there is the color change to the grayish or the blackish discoloration of the tube. And from this culture or this from this fungus, we go for the LPCB mount, this blue colored, the slide 18. And by the LPCB mount, we can give the idea about the genus of the fungus, like it is whether it is a Rhizopus, whether it is a mucor, whether it is a Cunningham, or whether it is a Rhizomucor or Epiphyomyces. By seeing the shape of the sporangium, the situation of the rhizoids, the shape of the size and the shape of the spores. By this, we can give an idea about the genus level, up to the genus level, we can say on the LPCB mount. So I can say that microscopy and the culture is a very good aid for the diagnosis of the mucor. Hello?
Neeraj, you are muted.
Okay, sorry.
Unmute yourself.
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry. So other than this, like when we specifically correlate with the ophthalmic or cerebral finding, this question is to you, Dr. Ankur. Can you add any other diagnostic tool other than whatever been previously discussed? Like, do we have any other diagnostic tool to determine how exactly the diagnostic procedure can be confirmed further?
Yeah, so, mainly with the help of the radiologist friend, what the scans they showed us, the easiest approach is of course the nasal endoscopy, because most of the spores gain entry into the body through the nasal cavity and through the sinuses into the orbit. So in pre-COVID era, we have seen some cases of mucormycosis where there was predominantly orbital involvement without involvement of other sinuses. So in such cases, of course, histopathology is the best option. We can go for an open medial orbital biopsy, prepare a KOH film because culture takes time to come, and then send it for culture. Apart from this, in the current era, what we are seeing cases are mostly multifactorial cases. So I think the easiest thing is a diagnostic nasal endoscopy in current era.
Okay, that's fine. So once we have diagnosed the pathology, it's important for us to go ahead with the treatment aspect. Now the mucormycosis, I have heard that it is like even the treatment aspect is also a multidisciplinary approach. Dr. Vikas Agrawal, can you just please elaborate like how important is the involvement of multiple field doctor for the treatment of mucormycosis? Dr. Vikas?
As we have understood till now that mucormycosis, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
As we have understood that till now that mucormycosis involves various organs and different tissue levels, and various metabolic predisposing factors are also there. So therefore, for proper diagnosis and management, it is essential to involve different specialties as team approach to minimize the morbidity and mortality. They involve physicians for initial diagnosis according to signs and symptoms, then diabetologists to control the diabetes, otolaryngologist, ophthalmologist, neurologist, pulmonologist, gastroenterologist, depending upon the organ of involvement, prosthodontist, maxillofacial surgeons, radiologists, and most important, microbiologist and intensivist for further management and reducing the mortality and morbidity.
Thank you, sir. Now, one of the initial or first, we are supposed to go ahead with the surgical line of treatment. May I request Dr. Anil Jain, who is an ENT surgeon, can you please elaborate about like how we are supposed to go ahead with a surgical line of management? Dr. Anil Jain.
First of all, I would like to tell you the role of surgery, what we are going to achieve with the surgery. Usually it's a endoscopic surgery which we should do it. The role of surgery is the removal of the devitalized tissue inside the sinuses and wherever it is in the orbit or sinuses, debulking of the infected tissue. By removing all this devitalized and infected tissue, we allow the faster action of the antifungal. What I'm trying to emphasize is surgery is not the only treatment, it's a part of treatment. How we plan the surgery? We always discuss before planning a surgery with our radiologist. Is a very important to know the extent of disease so that we can plan our approach to how to approach to remove the disease. We do the CT PNS, MRI PNS, and orbit T1 with contrast, T2 fat suppression imaging. On every imaging modalities is used to see and confirm the extent of disease. After confirming the diagnosis and ruling out whether it is bacterial sinusitis or not, there are various surgical principles we should follow. What we follow in our setup. There are various involvement of zones by which we divide it according to the extent of disease. In the zone 1, when only the middle terminate ethmoid sinuses and the maxillary sinus is involved, it is zone 1. When the disease extends into the premaxillary space or the pterygopalatine fossa, infratemporal fossa, sphenoid sinus, pterygoids, or it involves the V2, the Vedian nerve, it is zone 2. When it spreads to the orbital apex or the superior orbital fissure or the posterior orbit, it is zone 3. And the zone 4 is when the cavernous sinus is involved or when the brain is involved. It is zone 4. One thing I would like to say, we should do the surgery just to remove the devitalized and necrotic tissue. We should confine our surgery to this much only. We should avoid removing the normal tissue. Periosteum, the periorbita, and the dura mater. These are the 3 barriers for the spread of mucormycosis. Unless we are not confirmed by the imaging techniques that disease has spread into the orbit behind the periorbita or the periosteum into the pterygopalatine fossa or the infratemporal fossa, we should not open it. What I'm trying to tell you. Only after the confirming by the imaging and the endoscopic finding, we should open it. What are the different approaches we use? We usually go for the Denker's, modified Denker's surgery we do, so that a better exposure to do the surgery, whether it's modectomy or a septectomy, we always do the Denker's, modified Denker's surgery. One point, whether we should open the maxilla, whether we should open the posterior wall of maxilla to open the pterygopalatine fossa or the infratemporal fossa, depends on the findings of the imaging. Only we are confirmed when the disease is inside the pterygopalatine fossa or in the infratemporal fossa, then only we should open the posterior wall of maxilla. What are the various structures we remove? Various structures which are involved in the mucormycosis. Usually we do the endoscopic ethmoidectomy, endoscopic septectomy. Usually the posterior wall, posterior septum is involved. The turbinectomy, medial maxillectomy. We explore the pterygopalatine fossa or infratemporal fossa as per the findings in the MRI, and we do the infrastructure maxillectomy. Once we confirm, the one thing I like to tell you, the inflammation in the pterygopalatine fossa or the infratemporal fossa is not the indication that we should open the infratemporal fossa or the pterygopalatine fossa, because opening of the normal tissue, once we remove the normal tissue, we can create a new channel for a spread of the disease. So as much as we should avoid removing the normal tissue. As far as the eye is concerned, the endoscopic orbital debridement, we do only when there is involvement of the fat or muscle and there is a loss of contrast enhancement in the MRI. When we are confirmed that disease is there inside the orbit on the basis of MRI, then only we incise the periorbita and remove the tissue. But if there is only simple diffuse extracorneal involvement inside the orbit and there is enhancement of the tissue, or the patient is not fit for the surgery, then one thing that the ophthalmologist people do is the percutaneous retrobulbar injection of amphotericin B. I think our ophthalmic colleague will tell us better about this technique. Another thing regarding the eye, the exenteration of eyeball. We do it only when there is extensive involvement of the intracorneal tissue, or there is a orbital abscess, or there is a orbital apex involvement. Neeraj, can you share some one pic so that I can
Post-op
cover it better?
Yes, sir. Sure, sir.
The intraoperative one.
Sir, this is the one?
This is post-op. No,
Yeah.
before.
Yes, sir. Yes, I'll just show. Yeah.
No, this is nasal endoscopy. This actually this one, this imaging technique. This one. You can see this in this MRI film. There is involvement of the ethmoid sinus here, which is going till the pterygopatine fossa. The next one, no, not the imaging one. The same previous one.
Sorry.
You can see in this coronal film of the MRI, there is involvement of this medial aspect of the eye. Medial aspect of the orbit, there is involvement of the muscle also. In this case, once we confirm the disease that the disease is inside the orbit, lateral to the periorbita, then only we incise the periorbita. What we do in this case, the other one is, next one. This is the video.
Yeah.
Not a very good quality video. This is the right periorbita we have incised, and removing the devitalized tissue. You can see this white necrotic material which we are removing from the right orbit. We can see the pus trickling from the posterior part of the orbit. This is the devitalized tissue we are removing from the posterior part of the orbit until we see the pinkish muscle. Okay, can we go for the next one? Okay, this is the case. This is a video just after finishing the surgery. In this case, we have not incised the periorbita because we are not confirmed by the MRI that disease is inside the periorbita. There is some inflammation is only there. So we just remove the lamina papyracea, the medial wall of the orbit, and don't incise the periorbita. You can see the skull base here, and this is the movement of eyeball, but we have not incised the periorbita, and patient is doing well. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Apart from the surgical part, we must think of medical management also. This is equally, or I should say it is more important than the surgical management, I think. So this is very important to do the strict glycemic control, strict antifungal therapy, maintaining of hydration is very, very important.
Yes, sir. Sir, when we are discussing about the surgical aspect, I request Dr. Manish Raghani to give an overview, like what are the important things which we need to take care while the surgical aspect, specifically in relation to the oral aspect. Dr. Manish.
Yes. Neeraj, can you share pictures? Which are here? As Dr. Anil Jain sir has rightly said, that you have to preserve the normal tissue. You should not over excise the tissues, because you are creating new planes to spread the mucormycosis. So what I would like to say here, that we have some cases like this picture which we are seeing on the screen, in which the dead tissue is get sequestered out. Here's next slide. Yes, this one. So in the bottom picture, if you can see the alveolus and the teeth, which are dead and necrosed, they are actually walled off. They are sequestered out of the body. They're rejected out of the body. So we have got a plane of cleavage. So this is a conservative kind of surgery. We remove that all dead sequestered from me. We remove all the sequestered part, and the normal tissue we leave. Next slide, please, Neil. But in this case, this is a 30-year-old lady, in which what we have done, that I started extracting the teeth, there was not a single drop of blood. So there was no bleeding. Whole of the maxilla was necrosed and dead. As this fungus is angio-invasive and angiotropic, it has a tendency to occlude or thrombose the vessels, the greater palatine vessels, the posterior palatine vessels, the nasopalatine vessels in this palate, all were thrombosed. The whole palate was necrosed. So in this case, what we do is more radical maxillectomy, which I have done. If you can see, the cuts are placed in the maxilla, and whole of the maxilla was removed. Last slide. And in some cases, you can see the palate is sloughed out. This is all necrosed, and I have taken the whole maxilla. But as Anil Jain sir rightly said, that you have to restrict yourself to what extent you can go. You can't go to base of the skull. You have to means a little bit. You have to restrict that to which extent you can cut. So surgical principles are the same. You have to remove the necrosed and dead part, and you have to preserve what is normal. Yes,
so try to be as conservative as possible.
No, not as conservative as possible. You have to be radical. Yeah, it's not meaning of that. You have to be necrosed tissue. You have to be removed. You have to be radical, but means you have to use your brain wisely. That where to stop and because these are very morbid and you can say mortal surgeries. Patients, we have to see different aspects of patients also. That 30-year-old girl, in which one eye was lost, whole of the maxilla was lost. So that's you have to take into consideration various factors.
Okay.
Yes, Neeraj, one thing I would like to say, this is not a conservative surgery. This is definitely a radical surgery.
Radical surgery.
But we should avoid removing the normal tissue.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Ankur, can you just add few of the important surgical aspects related to the ophthalmic field?
Yeah. So as just now Anil Jain sir has said, that it has to be radical. But in ophthalmology, the important is the vision of the patient. So you have to be very, very careful. The first and the foremost thing is that radiology find out the extent of the disease. We can do astropathological information, but as Anil Jain sir has described, we have also classified according to the orbital involvement the disease into various categories. For example, as Dr. Anand Bansal has showed, there was primarily involvement of the nasolacrimal duct, or the disease was just limited to the medial orbit. So it is very clearly visible on MRI films. So we classify such diseases as 3A or at the stage 1. In such cases, the vision is unaffected. Now, as the disease progresses, it goes and involves more than one quadrant, for example, from the medial orbital quadrant to the superior or to the inferior, or it involves more than two structures at a time. But still in such cases, the vision is unaffected. So in such cases where the vision is unaffected, our prime importance is to debride maximum tissue possible, at the same time saving the eye of the patient so that patient can have some useful vision as far as possible. Now, as the disease progresses, which most of the cases are presenting to us, for example, stage 3C and D, involvement of the supraorbital fissure, involvement of the inferior orbital fissure, involvement of the orbital apex, such cases clinically present with proptosis, with restricted ocular movements, with diplopia, with conjunctival chemosis. These are the cases which requires more radical surgeries. Now, more radical surgeries in cases of mucormycosis, which has gone up to the orbital apex, orbitals involve the fissures, there is very high chances that if you don't act at this point and do a radical surgery, then it will spread. So in such cases, you have to go for exentration and remove maximum tissue wherever you can see. Once you have landed up into exentration and you have removed the visual part of the patient, there is no point saving unnecessary tissues. All you have to think about is the post-operative rehabilitation and cosmesis. So you can leave the lids, but you have to remove maximum intraorbital contents. And finally, it's the last stages in which the patient has bilateral orbital involvement. This is a very tricky situation because you have to decide, you cannot, it's very difficult to go for a bilateral orbital exentration. So you have to be very, very careful in such cases. You have to have a limited approach in the side of the orbit, which is having lesser involvement, and you have a more aggressive approach on the side of orbit, which is having more involvement. At the same time, as Anil Jain sir has said, apart from surgical management, the medical management is also very, very important. That means you have to start liposomal, intravenously liposomal amphotericin B in the recommended doses, and at the same time take help of your medicinal colleagues, your endocrinologist colleagues to control the sugar. These drugs are highly nephrotoxic, so you have to take care of them, meaning thereby that you have removed the disease, but in other ways the patient is not deteriorated. One important point of concern here, which is raising nowadays, is transcutaneous retrobulbar amphotericin B, as sir has pointed out. Yes, there's not large studies on this, but people are trying this modality. The disease which is, as I have talked, disease which is primarily limited to the nasolacrimal duct or just there in the medial orbit. In such cases, a trial of transcutaneous retrobulbar amphotericin B is given. It is usually given in the doses of 3.5 milligram per ml, and it is just given as a retrobulbar block, which we give for before performing any cataract surgery, and it is given in the retrobulbar stage. And we have to be very, very watchful for such patients that how it progresses. We have to do sequential scans, and what point of caution is that whenever you give such injections in retrobulbar space, they itself causes an orbital inflammation. So you have to be careful that is this retrobulbar injection is causing inflammation or is the mucormycosis spreading. So again, there comes the role of radiology, and they can help us in that.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for giving a very crisp and very brief about the orbital aspect. But it will be like as you have already told about amphotericin B, and it will be injustice if I discuss about regarding the availability of amphotericin B. So I request Dr. Anil Jain, we do talk a lot about this is the line of treatment, this is the medicine which we are supposed to give, but how about the availability of amphotericin B specifically, like if we talk about in Chhattisgarh perspective, how easily it is available, or what are the guidelines given by the government? Dr. Anil.
Initially, the availability of amphotericin B, especially the liposomal one, it was not there in the Chhattisgarh, but as the days goes on, now it is a little bit more availability is increasing. So a little bit more liposomal amphotericin B we are getting. Even in the institute like AIIMS and Mekahara, they are getting the amphotericin B. It may not be the sufficient dose, the optimum dose, because the optimum dose of the liposomal amphotericin B is very high in rhino orbital mucormycosis or rhinocerebral mucormycosis. In orbital mucormycosis, we have to give the 5 to 7.5 milligram per day, per kg per day. So it is a very high dose. The cost factor is also very important. If you are giving 5 vials of amphotericin B, liposomal one, every day, it will cost around 30,000 per day. The cost of only single injection per day is 30,000 for the patient. So it is also a very important factor. So we should try to balance it. I think we should try to give this amphotericin B liposomal 1 as per the requirement, as per the extent of disease, looking into the cost factor also. Or we can use, I don't know whether it is being used somewhere or not. I heard that we can use it intermittently. For 2 days, we can use the liposomal 1, then we can use some emulsion, which is less costlier one. That can be tried.
Sir, it is used at places, and it is graded according to the renal function of the patient. The
Yes, of course.
patient with good renal function, we have tried cases with when initially there was definitely liposomal was not available. So the available was lipid complex or deoxycholate, and whatever is available, you have to start. You cannot wait for things to come. So it has been given initially when the liposomal was not available. We have used them, and it produced great results. The only thing is we have to be very careful about the renal function of the patients.
Okay.
Yes.
So the Z stuff is like, even though the medicine is available, yeah, it is a sign of relief that medicine is like available now. But cost factor is also a big matter of concern for the patient. Another important aspect is like once the surgical treatment is being done for the patient, post-op management, because like in this particular case, we just cannot leave the patient, as we have seen many cases of recurrence. So Dr. Anil, how will you discuss about the post-op management and what exactly you do in the follow-up appointments?
As I said, in the post-op also, the medical management is very, very important. Apart from the medical management, we used to call the patient every 5th day for the endoscopic cleaning of the cavity and apply amphotericin B gel, which is available easily. After cleaning the secretions and crust and all that, we apply this gel into the cavity. Another thing which is important, when should we go for the repeat imaging? Because many times the patients relatives ask that whether you have disease has been removed or completely or not. We should go for the CT scan. We should see CT scan, or little bit of symptoms are there which persist, like swelling is there, or nasal stuffiness is there. So people say we should go for CT, we should go for MRI. So what protocol we follow in our setup? If we go for the repeat imaging, whether MRI or CT scan, only when there is a clinical deterioration, when there is a clinical deterioration of the patient, or we do the CRP level regularly, every 1 or 2 days we do the CRP level and see whether it is going down or not. If it is going down, then there is no problem. There is no need to go for the CT and MRI. It will create confusion, because if you do the MRI or CT scan just after doing the surgery, or 2, 3, 4 days, and CRP is going down, you can see a lot of post-operative edema. There will be a lot of post-operative edema. It lasts for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Though it will create confusion whether this edema, if there is a mucormycosis, or there is edematous, or there is inflammatory. Even it is very difficult for the radiologist to comment on that. So we should go for the imaging techniques only when there is a clinical deterioration, or CRP is rising, or when we find something gross or residual, a gross change in nasal endoscopy, when we do the repeat nasal endoscopy. Only then we should go for the repeat CT or MRI.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
I would like to share some my post-op pics, if you can.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir.
Yeah, this
is it this one, sir?
Yeah, this one. Yeah, no, previous one.
Previous one.
These are all post-op pics of our patient. This is the patient in which we did this intraorbital debridement. You can see this now. It is looking better. This medial orbital wall is looking better. In this case, we have removed the medial wall and as well as the floor of the orbit. You can see the post-op crusting is there. We do the, you can see the posterior of maxilla also. We do the suction cleaning of this crust in every 5 days, so that things remain, the healing will be better. This is the case where we did the posterior septectomy and this ethmoidectomy and bilateral functional endoscopic sinus surgery and posterior septectomy. And there is a good healing. You can see the pinkish tissue. It is a very good healing tissue. In this other one, this picture, you can see the yellowish, the fat, this orbital fat. In this case, we have removed the lamina papyracea only, and we have incised the periorbita also, and little bit necrotic tissue was there. Now it is healing. You can see the pinkish. Once you have reached the pinkish tissue, or once we start seeing the bleeding, it means that the tissue is healthy.
So we got a brief overview about post-op care, but as you are discussing, sir, like sometimes the patient becomes like more critical. So my question is to Srivastav, how exactly you go ahead with ICU management of critically ill patient?
Okay, sir. We all know mucormycosis is an invasive fungal infection, which may lead to multi-organ dysfunction. The important indication for ICU admissions are respiratory failure, shock, coma, renal failure. So treatment starts from early introduction of amphotericin-based therapy within 5 days of onset of symptoms, and early performance of invasive therapeutic procedure. Otherwise, the chances of mortality is more. So treatment start in addition to ventilatory management and fluid management. Important focus on mucormycosis are strict blood sugar level control and correction of diabetic acidosis, diabetic ketoacidosis, correction of acidosis, and adequate hydration, especially mucormycosis patients on amphotericin therapy. So need proper adequate hydration. Even before starting amphotericin, need to infusion of at least 500 to 1 liter normal saline or ringal lactate based solution, IV fluid, even 3 to 6 weeks, and need to insertion of central venous line or peripheral inserted catheter. Many antifungal drugs given via central venous line or peripheral inserted catheter. Don't give via peripheral cannula. Otherwise, chances of thrombophlebitis occur. If patient has CNS symptoms, so need to GCS assessment. For if GCS low, then ventilatory management, and ventilatory management for mucormycosis just like other patients. And these type need to, a patient on steroid need to taper steroid or stop to steroid, and judicious use of steroid, accurate timing, duration, need to steroid dose reduction, and patient on immunosuppression therapy like tocilizumab in COVID, so need to stop immunosuppressant drug.
Okay, that's fine, sir. As you have told, like we do have to keep a multiple options of drug. Now my next question is like normally in other infection, as the bacterial infection, we see that sometimes when one antibiotic does not work, we go ahead with a sensitivity test and then select for the better one. My question is to Dr. Sabha ma'am, who is a microbiologist. Ma'am, like how about the sensitivity test aspect in mucormycosis case? Can you just please elaborate about the sensitivity as test aspect of mucormycosis and drug, if we need to select on that basis any other drug? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Neeraj. As you say that like for the bacteria, we are doing the bacterial sensitivity, antimicrobial sensitivity against the different bacteria. Similarly, the sensitivity testing is available against the fungi, like for the candidas and for all the molds also. And but the technique now, there are the many automated technique, or the cards are available by automation, like the bioMérieux is available. They are doing by the automation, so that the results are available earlier than the traditional method. As far as the molds are concerned, like the mucor, there's the standardized method, which is recommended by our CLSI, is the broth microdilution method. Although it is a very tiring and some cumbersome method, but that is the recommended method by the CLSI against all the available antifungal against the mucorales like the amphotericin B, posaconazole, isavuconazole, everything. But there is now the commercially available e-test strips are also there, like from the High Media and other companies. They will give the MIC, the minimum inhibitory concentration, or the breakpoints for against the drug. As far as right now, the amphotericin B is the most, liposomal amphotericin B is the most active drug against the mucor. But there are the changes for the MICs, like some of the species of the mucor and the rhizopus, they are showing the increased MIC against the amphotericin, and like the Cunningamella, which is the most virulent fungus of the mucorale order. It is also said that that is also having a high MIC against the amphotericin. So there may be the treatment failures. So it is better to know which type of the fungus of the order mucorales is affecting the patient, and better to know the species. But the species, to go up to the species level is difficult, because up to the species level, the advanced techniques are involved, like the MALDI-TOF, which detects the species of the different species of the mucor or the rhizopus. And according to the species, the MICs are given. So if it is a treatment failure, or if you are suspecting there is a patient is not responding, then please go for the sensitivity.
Okay, thank you, ma'am, for giving an overview regarding this. Now, another important aspect is, once the surgical resection is done, obviously there is some kind of handicap to the patient. It's important for us to improve the quality of a life of a patient. So coming to the rehabilitation part, we'll start with the surgical rehabilitation. May I request Dr. Manish Ragani, who's an oral and maxillofacial surgeon, if a oral defect has been created, how you go ahead with the rehabilitation of those defects surgically? Dr. Manish.
Yes, Neeraj. See, our planning should start at the surgery itself, at first step itself. So what I do is, when the tissues are relatively uninvolved, like palatal tissue, which is not sloughed out, so we try to preserve the palatal tissue and the buccal flap. Obviously, the draining sinuses we excise, and the inflamed tissue we cure it out. But if it is not completely necrosed or sloughed out, no need to resect or cut that part. So that later on in the suturing, it will help you to preserve the palatal part or a buccal part. What I do next is, I also take the buccal fat pad also. Buccal fat pad can be taken and make it a bed of the wound and suture it. So that also can help in granulate and form the tissue. What is next is, when we, there is no choice, no option is left. When you excise the palatal tissue or buccal tissues, then what we can do, with I think ENT people will also know that we pack the tissue and place an obturator, surgical obturator, like you know, that surgical obturator, immediate obturator we place, and we suture it in the place, and then let granulation take place, healing take place, and then it can be converted into a transient obturator. So these are being at present, the scenarios like this. But when we resect the entire mandible, entire maxilla, and bone is resected out, nasal floor, palate is removed, then later on we'll see how the situation will come. Later on we can go for bone grafting or other implants, zygomatic implants, for rehabilitation. So at present, the patients, we are doing more of resection. We'll wait for some time, let's say 2, 3, 4 months or 6 months, and then we go for rehabilitation in further, like bone grafting. We can do, I think, either we can go take for electrous bone graft or some vascular graft, or then we can place implants and do rehabilitation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manish. Now, another important aspect, in fact, that's my field, which is a prosthetic rehabilitation. Once the surgical resection is being done and we have waited for some period of time, we are supposed to go ahead with a prosthesis, definitive prosthesis. But obviously, even at the time of resection, we have to think about something about the quality of a life of a patient. So immediately at the time of surgery till the later part of life, we do some kind of prosthetic replacement. I'll just give you an overview that what all prosthesis we do give as a maxillofacial prosthodontist. I'll just share my screen. Yeah, so immediately at the time of surgery, since the defect is created over there, we do give something called a surgical obturator. It is again a topic of debate that whether in the case of mucormycosis, are we supposed to give a obturator or not, surgical obturator or not? But I've given to the couple of cases, maybe like I'm also doing a follow-up. Let's see in later point of time that how is the outcome and what all things we'll see. But yeah, at the time of surgery, yeah,
Neeraj, there are different schools of thought. Some surgeons give obturator,
yes,
and they think that helps in support or helps in healing, and some don't give obturator. But I think as a maxillofacial prosthodontist and as a maxillofacial surgeon, we should go for, or even ENT colleague will also agree that obturator will help us in helping the tissue to heal.
yes.
Yeah.
And in fact, more important is also immediate improvement of quality of life to the patient. Like patient,
Yes.
we can remove the nasogastric tube, or if we have given Ryle's tube, we can immediately remove and patient can start feeding. So post immediate surgery, we give a surgical obturator. After a few days, there is something called as interim obturator, which is like for time being till the complete healing procedure is completed. So there is something called as interim obturator, means time being, and once the healing procedure is completed, and if we cannot do any kind of surgical rehab, then in that case we give a removable prosthesis to the patient, which is called as definitive obturator, which takes care of the defect part and also does the replacement of the tooth. This replacement can be for the partial dentition, or this replacement can be also for the complete arch replacement. But yeah, sometimes we do find difficulty for support of this prosthesis or retention of this prosthesis. So the implant supported prosthesis act as a big boon for us, and we do place implants wherever there are available bone, and with the help of this implant we support, or we go ahead with implant supported prosthesis. But in case of mucormycosis, normally it is like a guideline is followed. Still there is no specific guideline, but we do try to delay the implant supported prosthesis for at least 3 months, and after 3 months, if there is no recurrence of disease, then we go ahead with the implant supported prosthesis, as Dr. Manish has told. If there is a lesion of orbital region, this is not exactly a mucormycosis case, but just for the orientation, I've shown one of my cases. So if there is a lesion of just the eyeball, we can go ahead with an ocular prosthesis, which just does a replacement of eyeball, which is, it can be in the form of shell or it can be in the form of prosthesis. And in those cases, whereas along with the eyeball, the surrounding tissue is removed. So in that cases, we go ahead with orbital prosthesis. This case is actually an onco case, but just for ease of understanding, I've kept this case over here. So we can go ahead with orbital prosthesis. This is another case. Yeah, this was the case of fungal infection, not a mucormycosis, but there was a complete accentration, and we did orbital prosthesis, somewhat satisfactory, somewhat near to reality. And if there is a lesion which involves a big part of face, then we can go ahead with a facial prosthesis, which replaces not only the orbital content but surrounding soft tissue also, or a layer of skin also. And then to give another overview, as Dr. Manish has told, we do in teamwork with the surgeon. The complete lost part can be rehabilitated with the augmentation of bone graft taken from some other part of the body. And then if in case the orbital floor is involved, then to prevent the drooping, we do give a custom orbital floor prosthesis. As it has been said, that anything which is tailored fit is the best fit. So I need not say, Dr. Ankur knows, like anything which is customized gives a very quick time saving and superior aesthetics. And in case of very complex condition where there's a maxilla is lost or bilateral maxillary resection, then we go ahead with a quad zygomatic prosthesis, or there is something called as customized implant supported prosthesis. Even that can be also done. And if any other part of bone is resected, this is actually a trauma case, not a mucormycosis case, but just for the ease of understanding, like even in case of large defect which has been resected, it can be rehabilitated prosthetically in teamwork with the surgeon. So these are the different aspect where we go ahead with a prosthetic replacement. But again, there is still like, since there is a big outspurt later with documentation or with the scientific background, maybe a definitive protocol will be developed where we will come to know that what exactly type of prosthesis can be given and when to be given. But at present, we have a satisfaction that if there is a loss of body part, that can be rehabilitated prosthetically. So this was just an overview about the prosthetic replacement. And now coming to the next important aspect is, like, once we have done with the prosthetic replacement, it is also important. See, it is very well said, prevention is better than cure. So we till now, whatever we have spoken is like, once the disease has occurred, how to get to the signs and symptoms, maybe like diagnosis, the treatment plan. But another important aspect is, if we do a preventive measure, the things can be controlled, and especially considering the present outburst of this mucormycosis. If we start educating our patient about the preventive measure, it will be great. So may I request Dr. Anil Jain to give an overview that what exactly a preventive measure can be taken for the patient who have, like, as we see, mucormycosis most commonly seen in present condition is the patient who had a past history of COVID infection. So in that perspective, what preventive measure can be taken? Sir, please elaborate it, Dr. Anil Jain.
The most important thing is to avoid get infected by COVID-19. We all know that since last 1.5 years, we are knowing that what preventing measure we should take. The mask should be used, social distancing should be maintained, and we should avoid going into the crowded places. All the preventive measures are still working. These are very, very important things. We should use the mask in a proper way. That is a very important thing. Don't use a single mask for many days. Disposable and N95 masks to be used for 1 day only. Cloth mask should be used for 1 day before washing. Avoid frequent touching of the mask and the face. These are very important things. Avoid self-medication with steroids and antibiotics. These are things that we heard that the patients are taking steroids without consulting the consultant or without consulting their physician. This is very wrong practice, and even the home isolated patient are getting infected with the mucormycosis, and that's the one of the important factor. One more thing is that when we are suspecting mucormycosis, we should avoid doing the steam inhalation because it may cause the humidity may cause the growth of this fungus, especially when we are suspecting the COVID-19. When we are using oxygen concentrator in home, use the distilled water in oxygen concentrator and sterilize the equipment after the single use, after every use. If possible, we should sanitize our air conditioning units also in home and in workplace. We should avoid much plantation in our home. Many people are doing that plantation. We do the plantation in our home. We should not do it much. Ensure that the biomedical waste is not kept inside, whether it is a bio waste or medical waste, we should not keep inside the home, and it should be disposed of on the daily basis as early as possible. We should strictly follow the general sanitation protocols, like the hand sanitization, like the social distancing. We should wear the proper mask, avoid going into the crowded places, stay away from the public places unless it is very, very important.
Thank you very much, sir, for giving an
One more thing I would like
Yes,
to
sir,
say,
please.
for the patients who are infected with COVID-19, we should always keep in mind that there should be a high index of suspicion. When the patient should know what should be the sign and symptoms of the mucormycosis. Whenever he get the symptoms, he should immediately report to the physician or his family physician or the doctor to whom he consults. We should not waste time because it is very important. The time is very important for the management of mucormycosis. One more thing we see that once the patient of mucormycosis is advised surgery, they start going from one surgeon to other surgeon and wasting their time. We should not do that. Even if the mucormycosis is diagnosed, we should not get panic because surgery is essential in most of the cases. So we should not delay for the surgery, and we should avoid the self-medication. That is very, very, very important.
Thank you very much, sir. That was like a very crisp information. But like even we, as most of the audience over here are medical professionally, and we do work in some different hospital setups. So like this question is to microbiologist, Dr. Sabha ma'am, like how can we prevent this nosocomial infection? Because you're also an infection control officer. So I just want to put this question to you. Like we working in a hospital atmosphere, how about the prevention of nosocomial or hospital acquired infection? How can we just avoid it, or how can we try to reduce it, in fact?
Thank you, Neeraj. It's a very good question because now we are dealing with the pandemic of COVID-19, and most of the patients in the hospitals, now it is declining, but a few days back, the number of patients are admitted with the COVID-19. And we are seeing this surge of the mucormycosis. So as you know, I must say the infection control practices are the multidisciplinary approach. And every time, everywhere in the healthcare facility, everywhere, the standard precautions must be applied. The standard precaution means, I must say, the hand hygiene compliance must be there. The use of appropriate PPEs when you are approaching the patient, the management of the biomedical waste, proper management of the biomedical waste. And as the COVID-19 is there, the respiratory etiquettes are very important. Then use of the mask, as Dr. Anil said previously. In reference to the mucormycosis, the prevention of the mucormycosis, as you know, that this mucormycosis is mainly by the inhalation of the spores. So the transmission-based precautions, they must be applied, and the risk assessment of the patient, like the patient is if COVID positive or the post-COVID with high dose of the steroids, uncontrolled diabetes, on immunosuppressant, the risk factors are much there. So in this type of the patient, there must be the transmission-based precautions must be applied, like the patient should be kept in a isolation, and with all required PPEs, it should be handled, restrict movement of the patient, and one emphasis on the dealing of the respiratory equipments. Like if the patient is on the ventilator, the daily surface disinfection of the ventilator panels, trolleys, the arms, everything. The HME filters which you are using, It must be a disposable one, or if you are using the water, it must be a sterile one, like you can use the distilled water or the RO water, but don't use the tap water. One another very important thing in the HME is that if you are using a water, what happened that when the level lowers down, what happens that the nursing staff, they add on the top of the water. Don't do this. Just discard it and then freshly refill it. Similarly, it is applied on the high flow nasal cannulas. They must be their surface disinfection must be done once daily. They must be a disposable ones. In between the patient, in the COVID ward or in the COVID ICU, in between the patient, the nursing staff which they are dealing, they must change the gloves in between the patient. They must do the hand hygiene in between the patient. The spacing of the patient is very important. At least there must be a 6 feet distance between the two patients. Judicious use of the antibiotics, judicious use of the steroids, and as Dr. Anil Jain said, lowering of the immunosuppressant. These all are the preventive measures to prevent the spread of the mucormycosis.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you. With this, we come to the end of our panel discussion. It was like a wonderful session. It was in fact an honor to be with all of you. But yeah, last but not the least, we do have a question and answer round. It will be like we will be taking few of the questions, not all. First question is like from Dr. Ramashankar. Is it there is any prophylactic measure for the mucormycosis? I'll request Dr. Anil Jain to give a brief overview about it. Is it there is any prophylactic measure for the mucormycosis?
I don't think there is no prophylactic medicine. Only the preventive measure we can take while treating the COVID patient, while dealing with the diabetic patients. On the preventive measures, what is previously described, they should be taken to avoid getting infected with the mucormycosis. There is no preventive medicine. We can't give antifungals beforehand.
There's one more question. Maybe I think I should ask to Dr. Manish Raghani. Is there, it's been asked by Dr. Arni P, is there involvement of mandible, tongue, or a floor of mouth for mucormycosis? Actually, we discussed all the cases related to maxillary arch. So like Dr. Arni P wants to know, like, do we see an involvement of mandible, tongue, or the floor of mouth? Dr. Manish, to you.
Yes, yes. It's a very good question, actually. As Anil Jain sir said that it is a sinus from which the infection starts. So it spreads in the maxilla, and the closest teeth are premolar and canine. But I have seen one case in which mandibular anterior region was completely necrosed, and there was obliteration of the arterial supply. The marrow was completely necrosed, and I sent the sample, and it came positive. So here I would like to take opinion from sir also, Anil Jain sir also, that mandible, I have seen one case mucor positive. Sir, is it possible to come in mandible also, sir?
This may be a systemic spread. I think it is possible because basically the mucormycosis is a thromboembolic phenomena. It might have been caused the thromboembolism of the arteries which is supplying the mandible, or maybe the hematogenous spread of the mucormycosis itself.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now the next question is like to Dr. Anand Bansal. Please mention about the double density in fungal infection in CT scan. Dr. Anand?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So the double density sign is seen in the allergic fungal rhinosinusitis. And this is not because of the direct fungus, but because of the allergy caused by the fungus. And the our mucosa react to the fungus and produce the large amount of eosinophilic rich secretions. So it appears as the hyperdense within the mucosa. So the mucosa becomes the hyperdense in the central part, and the periphery will be the darker or hypodense. So it gives the double density, like bright in the center and black in the periphery. And this is seen in the allergic fungal rhinosinusitis, and because of thick inspissated eosinophilic rich secretions due to reaction of the fungus.
I think this is non-invasive fungus.
Yes, sir, this is not invasive. and not seen in the mucormycosis, mostly aspergillus.
Okay, so the next question is again to Dr. Manish Ragani. I'll just read out the question.
Yes.
Many times we notice tooth pain in the canine or the premolar, but no mobility, no sign of erosion or no medullary bone involvement in the scan. And the nasal endoscopy, there may be any erosion visible at that movement. So what should be done for the maxillofacial side, because my patient continue having tooth pain till long time and no mobility in the follow-up? This question was by Dr. Arpana Ludwan. Sorry, Dr.
Yes.
Arpana.
So see, again, you should have an eye of suspicion, highly suspicion. The history part is very important. Like patient with COVID history, patient and surplus with that diabetes or immunosuppressants, use of broad spectrum antibiotics, use of steroids, use of home or oxygen which are not proper. So your history will take to your diagnosis. And if you have highest level of suspicion, you take a biopsy, like I advised previously, raise a flap from canine premolar region, take some bone spicules from the teeth and send for biopsy. So if there is no other sign of symptoms and history suggests you, then go for biopsy and culture. It will tell you that the diagnosis is mucor or not.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Manish. There's another question by Dr. Avinash Chaurasia. I think I'll take that question. Would like to know about the planning of rehabilitation after surgical resection. Yeah, after surgical resection, we can go ahead with the removable prosthesis, and that removable prosthesis will continue for at least for 3 months, so as to cross check whether there is there is no recurrence of the disease. Once we are confirmed that there is no recurrence, we can go ahead with either of 2 line of treatment, whether it is a surgical or prosthetic. And again, the decision should be on the various condition, whether it is a surgical or prosthetic. If surgical, we can go ahead with the bony rehab, as Dr. Manish has told, bony with implant supported prosthesis or with flap closure. If prosthetic, we can go ahead with a definitive obturator and different kind of prosthesis. So like again, in a ZEAST, the rehabilitation procedure should be thought once we are very much confirmed that there is no chance of recurrence. There's I think I should put this question to Dr. Shaba ma'am. Is there any significance with the genus of fungus? If so, does the medication varies for the each genus of the mucormycosis? Kindly brief about the pharmacological support for the same. Like she wants to know if there are different. Yeah, please.
Basically, the different genus of the order Mucorales, like I have already said that there is different fungus under the order Mucorales, like the Mucor, Rhizopus, Rhizomucor, Cunninghamella, then Succinia, Epomyces. These are the different genus. And if we identify the genus, this will help us, because now some of the species or in some genus, they are showing the increased MIC against the amphotericin. And some of the, like the Cunninghamella, it is very virulent. So if we know the genus, which type of the fungus is affecting the patient, we can predict the outcome of the treatment. And we can predict the treatment failure also. So if we detect the genus, or we can identify the genus, it's very good.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is to Dr. Anand. In fact, he has already answered about it. Any role of CBCT? Dr. Anand.
Yes, sir. So CBCT is similar to CT scan, but it has got lower resolution and low field of vision. So CBCT is not a replacement, but it can help in the diagnosis of mucormycosis, because CBCT is fan-shaped. If you are going in the physics, the CBCT is a fan-shaped beam, and it includes the lower area, mostly the lower jaw, upper jaw, but it cannot include the the brain part, TNS and orbit. So CBCT can be helpful, but cannot replace the CT scan because of lower resolution and low field of vision.
Okay. With this, we come to the end of this session. Thank you very much to all the respected panelists. It was great session, and I'm also thankful to all the audience who are present over here. To conclude, yeah, mucormycosis at present, it is taking a big, like a burst, and maybe like one of the challenging scenario in Indian health sector. And with all this knowledge, it looks like the doctors are also well prepared for this particular situation. Once again, thank you very much. With this, we would like to thank, I'll request Dr. Vikas Agrawal, sir, who is the president of IMA, just to put a word of appreciation for all the panelists. Dr. Vikas Agrawal.
It was a nice session today, and I am thankful to especially Dr. Neeraj Chandraka, to take the initiative to organize this panel discussion. I'm thankful to all the panelists and all the audience, and we will like to organize a second panel discussion about mucormycosis involving other organs of the body in the near future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Neeraj.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neeraj, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Neeraj, and thank you all. It was a nice
Very
interaction
nice.
with all, sir.
Great presentation, sir.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Nice.
Thank you, sir.
Bye, bye. Thank you. Thank you.